want to just take a moment to welcome our speaker this evening, Kelly Hyndman. She's someone who's very well known to the MDI Biolab, and I see lots of faces in the audience that also know her. So one of my favorite parts about offering the science cafes is the opportunity to welcome back former students who spent time at the MDI Biological Lab. And Kelly and I came to the lab around the same time. I think I'd been there just a couple years when she came as an as a graduate student, a postdoctoral student. And we got to know one another, and I just am so excited to have her here this evening and be able to share some of her accomplishments with you, some information that I think is going to be a lot of fun for us to explore together, because I know as I was talking with her, you know, I'm one of those people that always thought you have to drink lots of water, that was going to make you healthy and help you lose weight and all those things. So we're going to maybe play a little bit of Mythbuster here tonight and learn about what the science actually says about some of those things that we may all have sort of taken for granted. So Kelly, welcome. We're so excited to have you, and all the way from Alabama. Is that where you are this evening?
Yeah, hi Jerry. So thank you for the invitation. I'm always happy to come back to the MDIBL, even if it's virtual like today. So yeah, I'm in Birmingham, Alabama right now, and it is 50 degrees out and sunny and gorgeous. So I'm sorry to those of you who may be snowed in.
That's the break, I guess. So tell us a little bit about your role at the University of Alabama, what you're up to these days.
Yeah, so I am an assistant professor of medicine, and I'm actually in a clinical division of nephrology. So I study kidneys now. But back in my days in grad school, I was at the University of Florida with Dr. Dave Evans, who many of you probably know and is on the call. And so back then I studied different fishes and how they were able to regulate salt and water in their body. These days, I study actually very similar things, but instead we're looking at how humans handle salt and water and how that has big effects on your blood pressure and can lead to other sort of kidney diseases that I study in the lab.
That's fantastic. Well, so when you were, you know, in grad school, I know Dave always is a big proponent of bringing students to MDIBL, but tell us before we get into the meat of what you're going to present this evening, a little bit about your experience at the lab. Why did coming to MDIBL, how is that helpful to you in terms of, you know, your educational process?
Yeah, I mean, it's made a lifelong impact on my life and my career. And so when I joined Dave's lab, I really wanted to work with sharks. And at that point he said, well, we're not really working on sharks so much anymore, but there's this really cool little fish that's up in the coast of Maine, and you'll get to spend your summers in Maine. So how does that sound? And I thought, okay, well, I mean, I love sharks, but okay. So back in 2002, I spent my first summer in Dave's summer lab at the MDIBL, and it is such an amazing environment. It was the first time that I interacted with a bunch of different professors from all over the US and other countries. You know, as everyone knows, it's a mix between MDs and PhDs. So it was really neat interacting with the MDs and meeting other graduate students and undergrads from around the country that had summer labs there too. And so it just, you know, solidified my love of asking questions and looking in nature to find answers. And so the lab really fostered that in me. And it was just, I mean, it was great. And to this day, I still come back to the lab every year to help with the comparative physiology course. So I've been very blessed for the last 20 years to have, I consider, a very strong relationship with the lab.
That's great. Well, clearly it must have rubbed off on you, because now you're doing kidney research, which, as you know, is sort of the, you know, the heart and soul of MDIBL.
Looking back, how could I not, now that, you know, all the great Homer Smith and all the guys, you know, were up there, and a lot of what we know about the fundamentals of renal physiology or kidney physiology and kidney biology was, you know, done at the MDIBL. So it's you know, kind of cool to still be a part of it.
Well, it definitely feels like full circle, right? So it's just really another great reason that we're excited to have you with us this evening. So let's talk about a bit about maintaining the right balance of salt and water in the body. You know, I think, as I mentioned at the outset, you know, a lot of us have sort of adopted that mantra that we should always worry about staying hydrated and taking in enough water. But what I'm gathering is maybe the science isn't really there to back that up. And I'm hoping maybe you can shed a little bit of light on that for us this evening.
Yeah, so I will say that, I mean, I'm going to share my screen in a minute. I thought it was important that we go through just a little bit of the basics of why we should care about how much water we drink. So let me share my screen and we'll go through a little bit of this. if at any point anybody has a question, please feel free to ask. And all right, let me get you guys all positioned. Okay, so yes, and if you are into Twitter, you can always follow me on Twitter, or you can tweet about me. I don't mind, it's fine. So why we should care about water is, probably a lot of you have heard this over your lives, is that our bodies are actually about 60% water. And so that's a lot, right? Because if you want to calculate how much body water perhaps you have, just take your weight in kilograms, multiply it by 0.6, and that'll tell you how many liters of body water are in you. So if you take a 70-kilogram man, let's say, he has 42 liters of body water. And so that's kind of crazy when you think about how much water is in us. And so our body requires very specific concentrations of salts and other molecules. And so if we drink too much water, we could potentially dilute those. Or likewise, if we're not drinking enough water, then we can concentrate those. And those concentrations are so important, because that's what allows all of our organs to work properly, right? So our brains won't work properly, our hearts won't work properly if we don't have these right concentrations. And so that's why it's kind of important to worry about how much water you're getting, as Jerry takes a sip of her drink. But why is this a problem for humans, let's say? Well, it's because we live in places like this, right? So hopefully you guys recognize, some of you, that this is Cottage Street on Mount Desert Island in Bar Harbor. And we on land live in this arid environment, right? And so we are constantly losing water. And you might say, okay, Kelly, but just down the street, like, is this beautiful environment? True. And so sure, the fish and the sharks and the marine life that live in this water are at 100% humidity, but we aren't. And so we are constantly just losing fluid to our environment with every breath we take, by sweating, etc. And there's other extremes. People live in the desert where there's like no humidity, right? But yet still people can thrive in these environments. And so I wanted to just kind of review briefly what it means to be in water balance. And so what being in balance means is that our water gain equals our water loss. And so probably you guys know most of this, but just so we're all on the same page, we get majority of our water through our diet, and that's through drinking and eating foods. And so on average, we get about 2.2 liters per day through our intake of food and water. That's about 75 ounces. But maybe what you don't realize is that just the breakdowns of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins in our body create what we call metabolic water. And so that adds up to about 0.3 liters per day, or 10 ounces. So if you add that up, our net water gain in the day is about 2.5 liters. So our water loss, how are we losing water, right? I think everybody recognizes every time they have to go to the bathroom that we produce a lot of urine. So again, depending on how much you're drinking and how active you are, on average, the adult produces about 1.5 liters of urine. But then we also have incidental loss, and that's through our skin, through sweating, and through our lungs. Every time we take a breath, we're actually losing water. And so that adds up to about 0.9 liters per day. And then of course, we have a little bit of water lost in our feces. So if we are in balance, what that means is that we are taking in about 2.5 liters per day, and we're outputting about 2.5 liters a day. So the net difference is 0, which means we're in balance. So where did this idea of 8 glasses of water a day come from? Well, it turns out it comes from this really old publication. Well, I shouldn't say it's really old. It's a very established and senior paper from the 40s. And it was published, it's called the Food Nutrition Board of the National Research Council. And so in the chat, we can post a link to this if you're interested in reading this article. So I pulled out the paragraph on water, and it says a suitable allowance of water for adults is about 2.5 liters per day, okay? And so again, they kind of did that calculation of how much water are we losing? We need to replenish what we're losing, which for the average individual is 2.5 liters a day, which works out to about, maybe a little bit more than 8 ounce glasses a day. But what I think is interesting is that a lot of people over the last few decades have forgotten this last part of the paragraph, where it says, water should be allowed ad libitum. So that means free access. So you should just be able to drink when you want, because the sensation of thirst usually serves as adequate guides to intake, except for infants and sick people. So what they're saying is, yeah, you should drink 2.5 liters per day, but if you just drink when you feel thirsty, you will be in a balance. You will return to balance. And the exception to that, of course, are infants, because they're still developing, and until you're past 2 years old, your kidney's not fully mature yet, or if you have some sort of underlying disease. And so we can talk more about that. But again, for the average healthy adult, when you're thirsty is when you should drink. And for some of us, that may be 8-ounce glasses a day. For others, it may be more, and for others, it may be less. So I wanted to just briefly talk about how our body knows when to tell us that we're thirsty. And so we'll give the example of, say, exercising without drinking. So let's say you've been working in the garden all afternoon in a hot sunny day and you're starting to feel thirsty. Why is that? Well, it's because our brain can actually sense the concentrations of salt and fluid in our plasma. And when that becomes a little concentrated, it will actually release a hormone called arginine vasopressin, which acts in the kidney to increase these little proteins we call water channels. And thereby you'll reabsorb water from your urine back into your body, and you'll excrete a very small concentrated urine, okay? That way we're keeping water, we're not just urinating it out. So the opposite occurs when we drink lots of fluids. If we drink a lot, then our plasma osmolality won't be as concentrated. Our brain can sense that, and it'll stop producing that hormone. The water channels in our kidney will go away, and then we'll produce a more dilute urine. And so this is what our body does, our body does all day long in order to maintain balance. Okay. So the last thing I just wanted to bring up briefly is what happens when we don't regulate this properly. What might be some of the symptoms? So if you're not getting enough water and you're dehydrated, you can have things like headache, confusion, irritability. Usually you have extreme thirst because your body's like, please drink water. So it's really, you feel thirsty, dizziness, fatigue, and then you can have sunken eyes, your mouth might feel dry, your skin may not have what we call skin turgor, so it'll just kind of, if you pinch it, it'll hold. But I think it's fascinating that if you drink too much water, you can have similar symptoms. And so in this example, which is too much water, which leads to diluting out, say, the sodium in your blood. So we clinically call that hyponatremia, but you can just think of it as low blood sodium. This is really, really bad for our bodies. But again, you can have symptoms like headache, confusion, and fatigue, same as if you're dehydrated. But usually if you have too much water, you have frequent urination. And if it gets into that pathological state, you can be nauseous, you can have muscle weakness and cramps. And in very, very extreme situations, seizures, coma, or even death. And so this is why regulating our body fluids and our salt concentrations is very important to maintaining our health. So with that's all I wanted to share with you in the PowerPoint. So I'll stop sharing my screen. I just put this picture up here because some friends and I got together for Thanksgiving, and we were only there 2 days, but we brought all this water because again, everyone's obsessed with water, even myself. So water is everywhere these days, right? So with that, I just, wanted to talk to people about what they want to know about water.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Kelly. Thank you so much. So I'm just curious. We talk a bit about water. What about the impact of other things that we drink, like, for example, coffee or alcohol?
Yeah.
How does that impact our ability to properly regulate?
So I think alcohol is a little bit of an easier example. So when we drink alcohol, yes, we're bringing in fluid, but the problem or the issue with alcohol is that it stops our brain from producing that hormone vasopressin. And so if you don't have that vasopressin, then your kidney's not going to reabsorb water properly and concentrate your urine. So anybody who has a few drinks might recognize that you frequently have to urinate, and that's because it disrupts that hormone being produced by your brain. So if you drink a lot of alcohol, you have to make sure you also drink more fluid in order to remain in balance. Caffeine is an interesting one because there were lots of studies, I think, before that has said that caffeine is a diuretic. But when they actually did the studies, what they found out is that it's a very short-acting diuretic. So let's say you don't normally drink coffee and you have a cup or a cup of tea. Yes, you're going to probably have to urinate frequently after that, but that's just sort of in that moment. Chronic coffee drinkers or caffeine drinkers, your body actually becomes basically immune to it, and it actually has no effect on your urine output. So it's kind of interesting that at least from the way your body handles or the way it interacts with your hormones is very different than, say, alcohol. But it's important to remember that that's still fluid you're bringing in. So that is part of your, say, 2.5 liters you're drinking a day. So if you're drinking lots of coffee and you're constantly drinking it, that's still fluid you're bringing in. So that's good.
Fascinating. I
Yeah.
want to just open it up. If anybody in the audience has questions, just raise your hand or unmute yourself. I think we're a small enough group that we probably can do that. So just feel free to chime in.
Okay.
One question, Kelly, that I was thinking about is, just in general about kidney health. You always hear that drinking water is really good for your kidneys. So what's the balance there? I mean,
Yeah.
is there a benefit to kind of keeping that constant flow of water?
So it really, I mean, this is really, if you're a healthy individual, when you're thirsty and you drink, you're going to be fine. Okay. So the thing to remember is our kidneys filter our blood 60 times per day. And so our blood volume is about 3 liters. So that means we filter 180 liters of fluid a day. So if you're drinking large amounts of fluid, you're just adding extra work to your kidneys. Healthy individual can handle it fine. That's no problem. Okay. Our kidneys can easily excrete the excess water or excess fluid we're bringing in. It's just in cases when there might be some underlying conditions. So a good one to think about is kidney stones. And so we were talking about this earlier. So kidney stones are crystals that form in your kidney and cause lots of damage and are very painful. And so one way to help hopefully prevent those is actually to increase your water intake. And by doing that, you can kind of think of it as trying to flush out the kidney and preventing those crystals from forming. And so it just, again, depends on the person and the individual. There are cases where you may need to drink more. And so in that case, what it's doing is help preventing issues. But ultimately, everything we drink gets filtered. And so it's then the kidney's decision to, do we need this? So I'm going to hold on to it, or are we done with it and I'm going to urinate it out? And so I think with people with, say, chronic kidney disease, which is a loss of kidney function, there was some studies that recently showed that perhaps you shouldn't drink too much water because that's sort of adding extra strain to the system, since that's one of the functions. But again, when they did the study, they found out there was no adverse events associated with sort of hydration, if not a little overhydrated in our chronic kidney disease patient population. So I think that's all good stuff to know.
Interesting. That's really good stuff to know. So Marissa, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi. Yes, thank you, Kelly. I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
My first question was, is it true that your body can confuse the thirst sensation with the hunger sensation? And then my second question is, salt content is important for to maintain that balance. What salts are important, like sodium, magnesium, I'm forgetting the last one.
Potassium.
Potassium, that's it. And like kind of what ratios, and should we be like adding that to our water, or what are those specifics? Okay,
so the first question is thirst versus hunger. So yeah, I actually don't know the answer to that. I know a lot of times people say if you feel hungry, just drink something because you're probably thirsty. So that may be true. I honestly don't know, because those are regulated. I mean, they're regulated completely different. So, thirst is from a different hormone that's produced in your brain and acts on your brain to make you feel thirsty, which is actually a hormone called angiotensin 2, which actually is very important in the rest of our body for our blood pressure control. But anyways, that's a fun little side note. So I don't actually know the answer to that, but I can't imagine that it's actually the same thing. I think people use that as a diet trick. Like, oh, you're not really hungry, just drink something, you'll be fine. If you're thirsty, you will feel thirsty. I think if you need fluid, you're not going to feel hunger instead of that. Now, your second question is a really good question. So we have lots of different ions in our bodies, but the main ones inside our cell is potassium, and outside our cell is actually sodium and chloride, okay, like table salt. So those are the most important ions, cations anyways, in chloride's an anion, but those are the really important ones that are important for our neurons, the way they function, the way our heart signals and things like that. Calcium's also really important. So again, for the average healthy human that's just working in the garden or, went on a brisk walk, just drinking water is fine. Because that's usually majority of what you lost. But if you really are out in the sun for a long period of time or are very, very thirsty, it's really important that you have a little salt too. And that can just come from eating something. You don't actually have to add salt to your water, or you could have a Gatorade or something like that. And the reason is our sweat, we actually lose salt and water. And so when you've lost a lot of sweat, you've actually lost a lot of salt too. And if you drink too much free water, meaning there's no ions in that water, if it's just pure water, you can rapidly dilute your plasma ions. So if you eat something or drink a Gatorade that has some electrolytes in that actually your body reabsorbs those too. So you won't dilute your plasma as quickly. So that's why it's really important to maybe consider eating too when you drink. But that again is more in the extreme cases. Just most of the stuff we do in our everyday life, you can drink water, pure water, and you'll be fine, right? Does that help? Jerry, you're still muted.
You'd think I'd be used to this by now. But we actually have quite a few questions in the chat. So I want to just read a few of them for you. The first one is, how much time does it take to rehydrate?
Okay, the minute you drink your water, your gut, reabsorbs it instantly and it goes into your circulation. And within, 20 minutes, your kidneys are filtering that again. So it doesn't take long to get rehydrated. When you're thirsty, drink until you don't feel thirsty and you're back being rehydrated. And if you drank a little too much, that's fine. Your kidney will excrete the excess urine. Mm-hmm. So it's actually pretty amazing. Especially the hormone vasopressin, it acts within minutes of being released from your brain in your kidney to help start concentrating your urine. So the system actually works quite quick. Now, as we age, we may lose the ability to sense that as quickly, and maybe it'll take a little longer to act. But again, we're not talking hours and days. It's on the scale of minutes.
Fascinating. Okay, a couple of other ones. What about the color of your urine? Can that be an indicator of balance?
So I think the problem is there's no one color that you should be striving for. And I can't remember if it's the same question. I think somebody else had it about keeping your urine colorless. So what I tell people is, if you are going to the bathroom so frequently and it's so clear that it's like impacting your quality of life, you're drinking way too much water, right? Your urine probably should have a pale yellow color to it. If it's pure water, then you're drinking way too much water, at least probably more than you need. And again, I'm prefacing this with this is in healthy individuals. If you have an underlying disease, then that's very different. You should talk closely to your doctor about those types of concerns. But in the average healthy adult, your urine should probably have a mild yellow color to it. And not, if you're getting up every hour to go to the bathroom, you can probably cut back a little bit on your water and enjoy your quality of life a bit better.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Do you recommend drinking half your body weight in ounces?
No. I recommend you drink when you're thirsty. Now, if you're that extreme athlete that is losing that much water, then you probably should be drinking and eating something and getting some salt so that you don't dilute your plasma too quickly. Because again, like I told you, that hyponatremia, that low blood sodium causes a lot of problems in us and can actually lead to death. So that's why drinking just pure water sometimes can be problematic. And that's why, you might want to consider having a Gatorade in those extreme examples, or just eat something. Eat something when you drink. There's always salt in everything we eat.
Yeah. I know I eat too much of it. Let's see, one additional question. Does the timing of when you have water or deprive yourself of water make a difference?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So, our bodies have a circadian rhythm, as you know. Our blood pressure peaks in the middle of the day and hopefully, again, a healthy individual dips in the night. And so it turns out our urine or our urine flow, let's say, has a similar circadian pattern. And so usually, we will peak in the middle of the day, have our peak urine production, and then it'll tailor off at the evening. Now, again, depends on when you're eating and consuming. And if you're somebody who drinks a bunch of water right before you go to bed, then you're going to have to get up at night. As well as probably a lot of people recognize the medicines you're on can affect how frequently you urinate, right? A lot of people have higher blood pressure. And so the first line of defense for high blood pressure is to put you on a diuretic, because your high blood pressure is because you're retaining too much salt and water. And so that creates this increased pressure in you. And so one way to bring down that pressure is to get that salt off of you. And so you use these diuretics to do that. And so if you keep the salt in your urine, the water will stay in your urine and you'll pee it out. And so probably some of you that are on diuretics have noticed that you might have to get up in the middle of the night and urinate. And so that's where it sort of disrupts that natural rhythm that we normally have.
Yeah. Interesting. That's great. So, you mentioned, Kelly, a little bit earlier, the fact that sometimes in older patients, we lose a little bit of sensitivity to that hormonal urge. Can you tell us just a little bit more about that? Like what's happening when that is the case?
Yeah, so I think it was interesting because I've always been told that as we age, our brain stops being able to appropriately sense the change in our plasma. And then the hormone vasopressin may not be as effective in our kidney. So it's still there and it still works, but it maybe takes a little more time. And so that's where there's this idea that if you're older, by the time you're thirsty, you may be already dehydrated, right? And I think there is some truth to that. But what's interesting is I found this study today I was reading where they looked at water intake in an older population and a younger population. And what they found is just their natural behavior of drinking this 2.5 liters when they were supposed to, both were made in hydration. So maybe our senses do get a little not as refined, but it's not all of a sudden like we lose them completely. And so it's probably more in cases where you are outside exercising or outside working in the garden, not just sitting at home, walking to the library, doing kind of low impact stuff. But when you're probably out in the sun and things like that, it may take your brain a little longer to sense that. And that's just, again, part of the aging process. And so what they recommend is that if you know that, or if you feel like, you're dehydrated and by the time you're thirsty, you're dehydrated, just start drinking smaller amounts of water throughout the day instead of drinking I have my big mug here. Instead of drinking this, down in 30 minutes, maybe drink it over the course of a few hours. And that way you always have a little water in your system and it'll help you maintain balance better.
Yeah, that's good advice. So another question, Kelly, does water intake affect blood pressure?
Right. So I had somebody early on in my postdoc tell me, well, there's all this blood pressure problems because everybody's chronically dehydrated and that's just causing hypertension. Well, first of all, if you're dehydrated, you actually don't have enough volume. And so usually your blood pressure is low, not high. High blood pressure is a very complicated disorder, right? There's lots of different causes of it. And one of them is, the long-term blood pressure is controlled by our kidneys through balancing how much salt and water we have in our bodies, okay? And so what happens is in certain individuals, and we don't know why yet, but they seem to retain too much salt in the body. And anytime you're retaining salt, water will follow. And so in essence, they end up retaining too much salt and water. It's not because you're drinking too much salt or too much water. It's because you're eating salt and water is just naturally following it. Healthy individuals won't reabsorb that salt. And so you'll just pee out your excess salt, you'll urine out your excess water. So indirectly, yes, water intake affects your blood pressure, but that's only because the primary defect is with your salt, if that makes sense. So if you're drinking lots of water, you don't have to worry that that's raising your blood pressure because it's really not. It's the salt you're eating and then the water follows. If you're worried about your blood pressure going up, then limit the salt you eat and then you'll be fine. Or you won't be fine, but you know what I mean? That's the problem, not the water you're drinking. Yeah.
That's good. Okay, one more question here in the chat. People with a diagnosis of Menieres disease are often advised to drink a lot of water. Are you aware of any evidence associating water intake and Menieres attacks?
So I don't know this disease, so let me look. Oh, inner ear vertigo. Oh, interesting. So I don't know what the molecular cause of this disease is. So I'm sorry, I don't know this. I don't know anything about this. So I've not heard of this.
Well, another research project for you to take on.
Yeah.
No, that's good. All right. So we've got one other question here. Could you talk about sources, adverse effects, and remediation of phthalates in drinking water? How are these related to plastics in water?
Oh, Okay, well, let me look that up too quickly. So, okay, so I how do I say this? I don't like bottled water. Okay. I think it is I am happy that there's bottled water because for certain people it's caused them to drink water when they weren't drinking water before. It's convenient, you know, all these things. But I personally am more worried about the things plastic leach into our environment, into our foods, into whatever. So I, first of all, am not, that's why I have my stainless steel you know, container that I drink out of. So I really don't know a lot about this. All I know is that plastics do leach things over time, and then we're intaking that, and that's gonna, you know, probably be bad, right? Like we have lots of examples of this over history from canned goods and things like that, that we didn't know then. More, you know, there's also this idea that now we have all these microplastics in all these bottled waters and stuff like that. I know very little about this. I just have my own personal opinions, and these are just my opinions. I don't know the science behind it. So I can't really answer your question, but I do think that bottled water is both a blessing and a curse. And I think, unfortunately, you know, it costs 2,000 times more to drink a bottle of water than if you got that same amount of water out of your tap. I am not a big fan of plastic to begin with. My New Year's resolution the last 2 years is to reduce my single-use plastics. And so that's what I've been trying to do. And it's hard. I work in a lab where all of our stuff comes in single-use plastic all the time, but we're trying. So I'm sorry, I don't know more about that. But yes, I do think that is something that people should be concerned with.
Definitely.
And not just water, right? Like soda comes in plastic, like all of these beverages, right? Fruit juices, all of these. I think there is some, reason to be thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another interesting question. When donating blood, should one extra hydrate or hydrate beforehand?
Yeah, so, I think that actually is probably something that's good. Again, they're going to remove blood volume from you. And so although water is not blood, right? Water is just one aspect of our blood. It will help you help keep your blood pressure up, I think, because they're removing volume from you. So anytime we lose our body fluids and lose volume, like I said, like in the dehydrated state, your blood pressure actually goes down. And so if you have, if you're fully hydrated and ready, then I think that'll help you not feel faint and things like that when you donate blood. But again, you don't have to drink, a ton. We're not talking about getting the gallon out and you got to watch the rate at which you drink free water. But just having a glass or two or a bottle or two before you go, or drinking while you're having your donation, that just ensures that you probably won't feel lightheaded and stuff when you get up.
Yeah, that's great. So here's a good one. What about hydration and leg cramps?
Yeah, so I haven't heard anything about hydration. Well, okay, so sorry. So that relates again to these concentration of ions and things like that. And so I think the idea is that you don't have the appropriate ion concentrations. And so your muscles will actually cramp up and feel very sore. But I don't know any more specifics about that. So I'm sorry, I can't tell you any more about that. But I do know that that's one of the symptoms when you have too much water, is that you will have this cramping feeling. It's not from dehydration, it's actually from overhydration. And I'm sure that has something to do with the muscle physiology and regulation of calcium and sodium in the skeletal muscle, but I don't know enough about that. Yeah.
So Kelly, one question about your water consumption. Are you concerned about the quality of your water? Do you filter it?
Yes, I do. I mean, so my whole life, I've been an avid water drinker. Even when I was very young, I didn't like milk. I preferred water. So I am always drinking water, and I always have a Brita filter, and I filter my water. Now, if I lived in a place that had great tasting water, like growing up, I came from Guelph, Ontario, Canada, and right outside of us is Arkell Springs, which is, if any of you have seen, it's now Nestle water. They built a water factory there. It's because the water is so good. And so Nestle water, a lot of times if you turn around, it'll say it's from Aberfoyle Springs, Arkell and Aberfoyle Springs. And so that's from where I grew up. And so growing up, our water was great. And so we never filtered it. But then what happened, at least in Ontario, and I don't know where everyone lives here, is every now and then they can get an outbreak of E. coli or something bad. And usually what ends up happening is that the young or the elderly get very sick. And so now our water is actually treated. So like in Guelph, for example, our water is treated to prevent those types of outbreaks. And so now you can use a Brita filter and remove that. So that way, you know, they're killing the bacteria and the bad stuff. We can filter out the bad tasting chloride or whatever it is they're putting in there to make the water safe for everybody. But yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting. I was reading some articles today. I love the taste of water, but I guess a lot of people don't. And so they just recommend putting a lemon or a lime or a cucumber or just something in it. And that if you're not an avid water drinker, maybe try that, or maybe filtering it and it'll taste better to you. So yes, personally, I do filter my water.
Great. Terrence, you have a question?
Hi, Jerry.
Hi.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating. I couldn't wait to see it. What causes the urinary concentrating mechanism to go haywire? What causes it to go askew so that it's not filtering properly anymore?
Yeah, so, okay, so it can go either way, right? You can concentrate too much, which means you retain all this fluid. And so that happens like in people with liver cirrhosis or congestive heart failure. Their kidney actually retains too much water, salt and water, and it puts extra strain on the heart and other kidneys. So I don't know exactly why it is, but we know it's the exact same mechanism that remains in balance. It's just always on. So your brain is just always producing vasopressin and it's acting in the kidney to retain this fluid. I mean, I could go into the details a little bit more if you want to go more into it, but what basically happens, okay. So what happens is our body fluids, like I talked about, is 60% water, right? Our fluid is in different compartments in our body, right? We don't, every time we cut, we don't, you know, water's not shooting out our finger, right? So 2/3 of our water is inside our cells and 1/3 is outside of our cells. And of that 1/3, 25% is in our plasma, okay? And then the other 75% is in our interstitium. So that's the space between all of our cells. In the case of like congestive heart failure, what happens is that fluid ends up in that interstitium and not in our vasculature. So our kidney thinks we don't have enough body fluid because it's not being perfused properly. It's not getting enough blood to it. And that's because the fluid's in the wrong compartment. So our kidney does what it evolved to do. It wants to retain salt and water. And so that's how you get a concentrating defect in those patients, is that their brain keeps thinking, I need to retain more salt and water. And so they tell the kidney to do that. When in fact, this poor patient has lots of fluid in their body. It's just not in the right compartment. And that's where you get really bad swelling and edema. But the opposite also occurs. So there's a condition called nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, which basically means diabetes of the kidney. It originates in the kidney. And this is a genetic disorder where the receptor for that hormone is not properly expressed. And so even though the brain can sense the fluid status and release that hormone, it can't act in the kidney because the receptor is not there. And so these poor patients actually have to drink 20, 30 liters a day to remain in balance because they urinate 10 to 20 liters a day. Imagine that. You know, we on average 1.5 liters. They're urinating 10 times more frequent than us just to remain in balance. And that's because they have a genetic disorder that causes that receptor to not be expressed there. There's a couple other variants in it, in the water channels themselves. They can be defective. And then if they're not in the kidney, then you won't be able to reabsorb water. So those are kind of the two main ones that come to mind.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So Kelly, oh, sorry. Did you have anything else, Darren? Oh.
Nope, I was going to lower my hand.
Any other questions from anyone in the audience? I don't want to monopolize, so just yell, raise your hand if you have any questions. You guys have been doing a great job of keeping the chat going, which is terrific. Thank you. Kelly, before you and I joined the group, we were talking a little bit about some of the other sort of experiments and science behind some of the information you're presenting tonight. And you were telling me a little bit about an experiment that the Army did. I wondered if you want to share that with the group. Interesting.
So, okay, so I have a question for the audience, but you can just, answer to yourself. So during the Gulf War, which caused more casualties, bullets or water? And it's a leading question because we're talking about water. So it turned out it's water. Okay, so what happened is back when the Gulf War started, this was out in this desert, in this very hot, arid environment. And the soldiers, unfortunately, a lot of them were were succumbing to heat stroke. So the military came up with this protocol called forced rehydration. And so they had sort of 5 categories depending on the temperature and the humidity of the area that they were in. But in some cases, they were mandating that their soldiers drink about 1 liter an hour of water, no matter if they were thirsty or not. They just told them, you drink this liter of water an hour, because they thought that would help. And so sure enough, heat stroke incidents went way down. But unfortunately, what happened was all these soldiers started getting sick and ending up in the infirmary because they were diluting their plasma sodium so quickly. They fell into that low plasma sodium range and started getting very, very sick and having to be treated in the infirmary. So the military didn't know what to do. And so they had called up a collaborator of mine, Mark Knepper at the National Institute of Health, who is like the grandfather of vasopressin and water balance, and said, Dr. Knepper, what do we do? And he said, well, tell your soldiers just to drink when they're thirsty. And they said, well, no, we can't do that. That's the military. They do what we say. So he said, okay, well, then make it a reasonable amount, like, a quarter of that, like 250 mils an hour or something like that. And so they didn't go as far as he suggested, but they did reduce it. And the incidence of low plasma sodium went way down. But there are some interesting studies talking about this. And so again, it's a balance, right? Like these poor soldiers were dying because of heat stroke or having severe adverse events because of heat stroke. But when they drank water too quickly, because again, these are healthy adults, their body said you need to retain fluid. So they're producing all this hormone to cause their kidney to retain fluid. When you drink free water, it's going to reabsorb only that water, dilute your plasma too quickly, and you can fall very ill. And so, yeah, it's an actual protocol called forced rehydration, but they've since modified it, and I think are doing a lot better with that. But it's kind of interesting. It's a fun little fact. Anytime you need a little party breaker, what caused more casualties was water.
That's great. We'll have to remember that one. Sounds like lots of common sense, and sort of the old, moderation in all things is definitely applies in this case for sure. Couple of other questions have come in the chat. I just want to read these through. Let's see. You mentioned people who exercise need to be aware of consuming more than plain water, i.e. electrolytes. But what about people who are stressed, i.e. injured or sick?
Well, so, okay, if you are sick and if you're vomiting or if you have diarrhea, you're losing lots of salt and water in that case. And so you need to replenish both. And so again, in a healthy individual with just sort of a short term, like you vomit once, probably drinking some water, you're fine. But if you've been like for days this going on and you've lost significant amount of water weight, you really need to replenish the salts and the water. So you should drink something with electrolytes in it. Same with vomiting, same thing. But if you were just, let's say you're just injured and you're not really, like you broke your foot or something and you're just hanging out at home, again, just drink when you're thirsty. There's no need to drink any more than that. Likewise, if you're sick and just not feeling well, you can drink some. If you're not eating, then of course drink some electrolytes and things like that. But if you're just kind of stressed, like under the weather, not feeling well, water's fine. Yeah.
Interesting. What about the temperature of the water? Does it make a difference?
Yeah, I don't think it makes a difference. It doesn't make a difference in the way your body senses because, our insides are all 37 degrees anyway. So I think that's just a preference. Whatever you want. And I think, again, some people think cold water tastes better. So whatever you need to drink your water, do it. But physiologically, no, I don't think it makes a difference. Now, if you are very hot, yes, drinking some cool water will help with your temperature regulation, but it's not going to help with your hydration status.
Interesting. So Gail Conrad mentions in the comments the fact that she associates drinking like a couple of glasses of wine with an increase in leg cramps and does get some relief by drinking water. So she's just curious, like, could there be some other, mechanism involved, maybe that water is helping, or it's just a comment really?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible in that case that alcohol is going to dehydrate you, right? In theory, because it causes you to urinate more than you're taking in. And so maybe for you, that's causing some reaction in your muscles. It's a cramp. And when you drink the water, it's diluting everything back to the normal normal range. The other thing is there's lots of things in wine. You know, a lot of people get headaches from wine and stuff like that. So I don't know enough about that aspect of it, but it's possible that if it's just with wine, maybe there's also something else in the wine that's causing it. But to me, the good news is a glass of water, so you know how to fix it. You can still enjoy your wine.
That's great.
Yeah.
Kelly, this has been terrific, so informative and a lot of fun. Thank you for, making it so enjoyable. Any other last questions for Kelly before we sign off and talk a little bit about, oh, Terrence's got one.
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
Unmute. How's that?
Perfect.
That's good.
Okay, so the lab has a long and illustrious history of osmoregulation, and our reputation was made on cardiorenal physiology. And at the same time, concurrently with that, it had a long and illustrious history of martini drinking at the parties there. And going all the way back to the days of E.K. Marshall and Homer Smith and my father and Frank Epstein and Dave Marin. And it goes on.
Yeah.
I always watched these guys and I thought they must know what they're doing. They're renal physiologists. So they're suppressing fluid reabsorption in the kidney constantly. And but it must be okay because they know that, right?
Yeah.
My question is, does chronic social drinking like that, I'm not talking about alcoholism, but
Right.
do chronic habitual drinkers, are they always a little bit dehydrated?
So that's a great question. And I don't know the answer to it. I would say it's quite possible. I mean, if they really aren't taking in water, if you're not taking in enough water to replace what you lost after drinking the alcohol, you're always going to be in a deficit. I will say, though, interestingly, what we see, I think, more of, or what people at least talk about more of, is the opposite, which is what we call psychological polydipsia. So what that is that's when you think you're always dehydrated and you constantly drinking, and you drink and drink and drink and drink and drink and drink and drink. And the problem is, again, you're going to drink more fluid than your kidney can filter and dilute your plasma ions to that, again, critically low level that you're going to start having headaches and feeling dizzy. But these people have a psychological issue where they think, well, I'm not drinking enough. And they just keep drinking more. And then they end up in the hospital. And so that's actually a very common phenomenon these days, actually, because if you look around, like, I don't know how many of you right now have a drink in your hand, but in my lecture hall, everybody has at least one bottle of water, if not a bottle of water and a coffee in their hands. And so we have this sort of social aspect of drinking that we enjoy. And for the healthy individual, it's fine, but there's certain individuals that take it to the extreme. And so, you do see both. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's certain people who drink so much alcohol that they just, kind of live with the headaches and stuff and don't realize that if they drank a little water, they would probably fix some of those issues. But usually we hear the other thing, which is people are drinking too much and overhydrated. I haven't heard a lot about like alcohol drinking or caffeine drinking leading to extreme dehydration all the time. But it is possible that, that they are chronically dehydrated a little bit. And for a healthy individual, that's nothing to be concerned with. It's only in cases where you have underlying disease or if you're a stone former or things like that, you really don't want to do that.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. I think Dave Evans in the chat just spoke for all of us and said how proud we are of you. MDIBL takes full credit. So
like, as you should. And hi, Dr. Crockett. I see you on there. Good to see you. Yeah. And Dr. Preston, I remember you from the good old days at the lab. And so everybody else, thanks. Good to see you all. Chris, of course.
Well, we're really happy to have you. Gail, thank you for your comments.
Oh yeah, Dr. Conrad, good to see you. Yeah. So if anybody ever has any questions, I'm happy to look things up and provide resources. Just either email me or you can tweet me, whatever you want. The lab knows how to get in touch with me, and I'm happy to help, understand or help clarify anything I can scientifically. But, just remember, what we take in, we have to put out. If not, we're not in balance. And so it can go either way. We can not take in enough or we can take in too much, And so just kind of listening to our bodies, and we'll be fine. You know.
Sound advice for sure. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Kelly. Before we let Kelly go, before we let all of you go, I want to just remind you that our next Science Cafe will be held on February 14th. So we're going to continue the Love Fest for MDIBL's education programs. We're going to talk a bit about a statewide program that some of you may not be familiar with. It's called the INBRI program. And let me just tell you, the federal government is the best at making acronyms that make very little sense to the rest of us. But this is a program funded by the National Institutes of Health that the MDI Biological Laboratory has led for more than 20 years. And the intent is to really increase the capacity in Maine for biomedical research. And so this is a statewide partnership. It brings 14 institutions together. It's led by the MDI Biological Lab, and we partner with nearly every other academic institute in the state of Maine. And we bring students to the MDI Biolab to work with our scientists, but we also fund scientists at those partner institutions. So we're going to put together a panel. And we're going to have a group of folks talk about the impact that that program has had on creating a workforce in the state of Maine to help drive economic improvement and to really, again, create an environment that's supportive of science and research. So over the years, we've supported more than 50 scientists on this grant here in the state of Maine. So I hope you'll join us. We have some great student testimonials and some examples like Kelly shared with us tonight of the impact that these kinds of programs have on future scientists. So a wonderful way to end. Kelly, thank you again for your time this evening. And thanks to all of you. We look forward to seeing you next month.
Bye.
Bye-bye.